Dr. Biodun Adedikwe, economist and partner at B. Adedikwe and Associates, says, quote, the enormity of Nigeria's socio-economic problems deserves a new way of thinking and a more pragmatic approach to economic management that goes beyond traditional arguments in the popular policy framework. That's part of what he wrote and sent to us. Dr. Adedikwe is joining us live here in the studio for a three-part discussion, starting with the Nigeria's troubled energy sector. Now, let's get started. Dr. Adedikwe, we thank you for coming.
It's my pleasure, and
we appreciate you being here and for being made in Nigeria. Looks like all the guests today on the program are trouncing me as far as made in Nigeria is concerned. So let's get started with the milestones since independence. And I'm sure we can go back with, of course, it was basically hydro and what we started with a little power plant in downtown Lagos Island, whatever you generating using some coal and whatever. Yeah. Down the years and down the decades, talk us through for about 1 minute the milestones that you think we've reached as far as the energy sector is concerned.
Well, primarily, we started, as you rightly said, at the beginning with coal. Then we began to have a policy in 1984, documented. Then 1993, we reviewed that. And then 1996, then 2003, and more recently. So essentially, what we have done over time is to expand the sources of generation of power. But one particular element was missing all through, and that is what we are suffering today. Now you generate power, you transmit, you distribute, then you secure. We never paid much attention to security of the energy that we generate and distribute. So eventually, therefore, you generate, you distribute, and then you lose the power. And the point is supposed to get to the consumer. And of course, at some point also you come back, there's disruption to generation. It's like you return to the drawing board. To ground zero. That's right.
So technically, over the decades, we've kind of pushed coal out of the way. We went down with coal, so we stopped using coal.
That's right.
And then we moved to hydro because the World Bank came in and a few other DFIs helped the Nigerian government, the military in those days, and we started ramping up on hydro massively along the north-central corridor, isn't it?
That's right.
And even to the southwest, where you have been. So we built dozens of dams, as it were, with a view to generate power. Now, in terms of evacuating this and getting them to the consumers through one single, massive, monolithic agency called NEPA.
NEPA. Now, that was a major challenge, because not only because it was a public enterprise, it was also in what I call monumental inefficiency. And so the policy tweak now came that, look, why don't we unbundle NEPA? And they began to talk about the 18 distribution companies, the generation companies, and of course, we also talked about transmission, which today, of course, still remains within the control and grace of the government. Now, there are arguments for and against that. But primarily, the issue for us today is that we had NEPA as a behemoth that in fact was a far cry in terms of efficiency when you compare it to its predecessor, and that is the Electricity Company of Nigeria, ECN, which you grew up knowing and that operated in a particular pattern. For example, in any neighborhood you lived in then, in the days of ECN, you get to know when there will be power outage. You get to know when power will be restored. So you could plan. Okay, it was not that we had power 24/7, as it were, but because of that mode of operation, it was easy for corporates and even private individuals to plan their lives around the supply of electricity. But all of that changed when NEPA came on. Of course, don't forget there are two important things here when it comes to energy. Number one is the size of your population. It was growing significantly. More recently, in the last 15 years, they're about 3.2% per annum. And that is why I said today.
3.8%. That's lower.
And so you are looking at the population estimated at about 182.5 million people. Okay, that is on the one side, the energy demand of that number of people. Secondly, when an economy is developing, now taste changes, you also begin to demand for what people could not afford before. And for that reason, the demand for energy will also increase. So as economies also develop, the volume of demand for electricity will also change. Because what people now use in terms of gadgets are more electronic in nature. So that all of this would have featured in the energy policy
and strategy.
And then the strategy.
Then action.
Exactly. So those elements were not properly taken into account. And that is why as of today, 2016, October 3rd, we are still struggling with what we had. 2007, let me put it that way. The figure we looked at then, when we projected that by year 2020, Nigeria should not be doing less than 40,000 megawatts. That was what we envisioned then. You know, in talking about the FSS 2020.
FSS 2020, yes.
Okay, which I was a part of. And the idea was that if Nigeria could add 3,000 megawatts annually to that figure over the 30-year period, we should be able to go beyond 40,000 megawatts. Which in fact also I will say here at this forum was what informed the target that the late President Yar'Adua gave to the then Minister of Power for 2008. He gave him a target of 6,000 megawatts. And that was the concept behind it. Because the idea simply was, if we could add 3,000 to what we had then, that would take us to 6,000 plus, end of 2008. Do that consistently for 30 years. Then by 2020, we should be talking about some 42,000 megawatts.
So over these years and decades, we've had policies, strategies, and actions, but we've also had transitions and transformation within that energy sector. Put together, how come that none of these have been able to deliver power to the people?
Now, two critical elements here. One is what we call the pervasive concern about corruption. We can't escape that. Okay, wherein we had energy projects. Of course, even at some point when we privatized, we unbundled NEPA and privatized, we didn't do it in a clean way. Now, I call it dirty privatization. Just like any of the 10 plans of what we call the Washington Consensus. Okay? Each of them, if it doesn't follow the conceptual framework for them, you end up with a dirty version of it. And that means in privatization, for example, you have only the cronies of those in government benefiting from that process.